Trump comes from the business world, and he comes from the New York elite business world. So, a lot of these folks that he has in his cabinet, that he's having come in for meetings constantly. He's got Jeff Bezos eating out of the palm of his hand, paying $40 million for a documentary on his wife and $35 million more on PR.
Please comment, like, subscribe, and share. In today's heated debate at the Dartmouth Political Union, Navarro goes head-to-head with Scott Jennings over Donald Trump, immigration, and the future of the Republican Party. Pushes back hard against MAGA arguments while Scott fights to defend Trump in this intense showdown. Let's get into it.
And the president also announced a proposed policy to ban large institutional investors like Blackstone from buying single-family homes. These policies have been described by President Trump and by the Republicans who back them as policies that will tackle the affordability crisis, lower cost of living for Americans. Anna, we'll start with you. In your opinion, how should the Republican Party today and in the future approach regulation of the private sector, maybe specifically with thoughts to cost of living and the affordability crisis we're currently in?
You hit upon something which I think is very interesting. There is, in my view, a strong change between Trump 1 with big business and Trump 2. Trump 1, he had somewhat of a contentious relationship. Trump 2, you saw them all sitting in the front row of his swearing in, and they're constantly at the White House. You've seen people who differ with him vocally on a number of issues like Bill Gates, like Tim Cook, social issues, coming to the White House and basically kissing up to him and saying yes, sir, to anything that he proposes. So he has very successfully, with some very few exceptions, very successfully managed to get big business and the big moguls to capitulate to him, along with big law firms and big media and big institutions, big universities. A lot of big things have capitulated to Trump. Look, we saw in 2008 with the failure of the banks that not having some sort of regulation, if you leave these folks completely unregulated, you are bound to have problems. I don't think they're folks that I don't think that business folks should be left to be unregulated and run amok. And I think the only person who could get away with the proposals that you just mentioned, the housing proposals, and is Donald Trump. If anybody else, if a Democrat had said, we're capping the rates on credit cards, big business would have gone insane and called them radical liberals, as Scott says, and communists, and what are you trying to do? If a Democrat had made the housing proposal of no housing institutions to buy, no Blackstone to buy housing, they would have said the same thing. But Donald Trump, I think, has a lot of leeway to say and do some of these things. I think he's going to encounter some opposition from Republicans and also from Democrats. But I think he has managed to wrangle big business to his side, and they're on their best behavior right now.
And to be clear, do you think that's a good thing?
I think it's a good thing when an administration and business, which is such a source of jobs, such a huge part of our economy, are working together instead of being in a contentious relationship.
Please like, subscribe, comment, and share. One major reason this debate connects with so many Americans is because people have already seen what happens when giant corporations operate without enough oversight. The 2008 financial crisis destroyed millions of jobs and homes, while major banks received huge bailouts, and many working-class voters still remember it. Today, the housing market is another big issue. Large investment firms have been buying massive numbers of single-family homes, making it harder for everyday families to afford their first house. In many cities, cash-rich investors were able to outbid regular buyers, driving frustration over housing costs even higher. What makes this debate even more interesting is how these ideas are treated politically. Policies like limiting corporate home ownership or capping credit card interest rates are often called socialist, when Democrats support them. But when Donald Trump promotes similar populist policies, many conservatives suddenly become more open to government intervention. That shift shows how much the Republican Party is changing economically. At the same time, polls show many Americans distrust massive corporations almost as much as they distrust Washington politicians. With inflation, rising rent, and growing debt hurting families, more voters are supporting stronger economic action if they believe it could lower costs. That's why this conversation matters so much.
But given the new constituency of the Republican Party, given the new populist attitude of some of these new constituents, I think you're going to continue to see a willingness of some Republican leaders to intervene against business if they feel like it's good for their constituents or good for the people who put them in office. I don't really anticipate this going away, to be honest. I think it's going to continue to be part of the Republican brand. Now, on the Democratic side, they're very hostile and have always been, but are increasingly hostile to capitalism of any kind. And so if I were in business, I would advise them to say, you're usually going to get a better deal out of the Republicans, even if you're going to have to deal with some whacks on the head every now and again, because what you're dealing with in the other party right now is raw, unadulterated communism. But among the Republicans, there is a willingness to say, look, I'm not going to let you run amok and do whatever you want to do, because we've seen the wages of that in the past, and you've not always done things correctly. And I don't foresee that going away, particularly with J.D. Vance. I'll just close on this, who I actually think is even more likely to be an interventionist when it comes to business than Trump. I think Vance's brand of populist conservatism, where he comes from, is not too far from where I come from. And, there's still a lot of New Deal DNA in the people of Appalachia, where J.D. comes from, and I think you would see that if he becomes the president.
Thank you, Anna. If you want, you have 2 minutes to respond to that. Otherwise, we can move on. Okay.
No, I think one of the things that I do think is significant is that Trump comes from the business world, and he comes from the New York elite business world. So, a lot of these folks that he has in his cabinet, that he's having come in for meetings constantly. He's got Jeff Bezos eating out of the palm of his hand, paying $40 million for a documentary on his wife and $35 million more on PR. So I think Trump has made tremendous change. I will also tell you this: if Kamala Harris had won, all of those folks that you see around the table right now praising Donald Trump would be in the White House celebrating Kwanzaa dressed in dashikis.
Please don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share. This debate really highlights the growing divide over modern U.S. foreign policy and global alliances. While leaders in Washington have pushed NATO allies for years to increase defense spending, critics argue the bigger issue is how diplomacy is becoming more personality-driven instead of institution-driven. Experts from organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations warn that short-term transactional politics can weaken long-term trust between allies. Critics say that when alliances start feeling conditional instead of dependable, it can create uncertainty that benefits America's adversaries. That's why this conversation matters so much. It's not just about being tough on the world stage. It's about whether this approach strengthens or weakens global cooperation in the long run. And before we continue, are you tired of getting completely different versions of the same story from the media? One side says one thing, the other says the opposite. That's why platforms like Ground News are becoming popular. They let you compare how left, right, and center outlets cover the exact same story, so you can see the full picture for yourself.